You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and joined as always by your co-host, Kevin. Kevin, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. So Wildcard Weekend though was kind of anything but wild.
Right?
The best game hands down was Washington Tampa Bay, and outside of that, I was not locked in to any of the games that were on TV. Like they just were not super, I don't know, edge of your seat must see stuff. Like, but honestly, Tiger Woods walkout to the new golf league tonight. So Tiger Woods walked out to Eye of the Tiger at SoFi Stadium. Honestly, that got my juices pumping more than most of these wild card games did. So that'll kind of tell you at least my thoughts on it. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
we're out of that. We're into the divisional round, so we expect things to start getting a little bit tighter. But it's all good, man. It's Tuesday night. I get to hang out with you, so life can't be too bad, right?
Exactly, right? That was kind of the sad thing, because normally Wild Card Weekend, like, things happen, right? There's movers, there's shakers, there's big upsets. Like, the vast majority of these games were over by halftime. The Steelers may have made a little bit of a run in the second half, but that never really got back within a touchdown type of thing, right? Justin Herbert did not look very good at all in that performance there. The Broncos came out, hit him in the mouth right away, and then Buffalo said, "Oh yeah, watch this."
Yeah, I was super excited after that first drive. I'm like, all right, we're going to have ourselves a game. And then they were stuck in neutral. I mean, and people want to point to the missed field goal. Like, guys, I don't know that missed field goal going into halftime did that much for momentum. I'm not convinced of that. Like, 10-10 at halftime still does not give you a reason to not score points in the second half.
Right.
Like, so I'm right there with you.
So, and I mean, maybe the big upset was the Rams over the Vikings, but the Rams had home field advantage. Granted, it was in Arizona, but right, like, they were the higher seed there. So,
and they beat the Vikings in the regular season too.
Correct, right? The Vikings only lost to two teams all year, right? They only lost 4 games, through the divisional round, and all 4 of those losses were to 2 teams, Detroit and the Rams. So definitely an interesting one there, right? Like, sometimes teams just, the matchups don't work, and some teams got your number, and those 2 teams certainly had the Vikings number this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see it. It's why no one wanted to see the Bengals.
Right.
The Rams were the hot NFC team coming in. Right. They just managed to win. They managed to win enough games to win that division because they didn't have to fight with Pittsburgh and Baltimore, having double-digit wins and everything else. So, but the Rams were that team. They took some early losses. They had to deal with some injuries, and then they got hot and they won some ugly games. It wasn't necessarily as pretty as the Bengals wins were, but those 2 teams side by side had a good number of similarities. And one team got in and you have to deal with them, and the other team was, basically a half a game out. And the Bengals win one of those games early in the season where they took a bad loss, and they're in instead of the Broncos.
Right. And at that point, I don't know that anybody wanted to play the Bengals. Like, that team
I don't think so.
Coming down the stretch. Like, that's part of the reason that I think you saw the Chiefs sit absolutely everybody on that one in week 18, was the simple fact that there is some of that Joe Burrow seems to be the Chiefs killer in there, and the simple fact that that is that you don't want to have a team that's that hot coming into the playoffs and having to deal with them, because they go in and they beat Buffalo, they're coming to Kansas City next.
Right.
So I do think that there was a fair bit that played into that, especially since you had some of those players coming up saying, "Oh, they're playing week 18, they're yada yada yada." And then as that stretched on just a little bit, oh, everybody's sitting. Oh, yeah. We're basically taking 2 bye weeks here. So
yeah, and we'll see what that strategy looks like, right? I mean, it's a veteran group, so I don't think that it's going to be too terrible, but you never know. I mean, we've seen that happen before where a veteran team does get a couple weeks off and they're just a little too lethargic in the first half of a game, and they get themselves in a bad situation. It's hard to crawl out of, but yeah, we'll see. The Texans matchup looks a lot better now than what it did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Just by the sheer fact that they woke up and realized, hey, we're not a bad football team. We just need to have it kind of click together. And for the most part, it did. They were super sound defensively. The Texans were, right? 4 interceptions and 4 sacks on Justin Herbert, a quarterback who only had 3 picks all season long coming into that game. I mean, so they were messing with him for the entire game. Yes, home field helped, but I think Houston is a team that they didn't know how to be the front runner just yet, right? It's a young team. It's a young coach. And everyone was, including, our show, right? Everyone was kind of anointing them. Look, we know they're going to win the South. Like, can they push the Chiefs, right? Can they push the Chiefs and get over that hump and make some real noise in the playoffs? And then the last few weeks of the season, they were kind of, I don't want to say gassed, but they were just, they were hitting a rut is what they were doing. And everybody kind of turned on them and it's like, oh, we're the underdogs. We like that. We know how to play that role. And so, and it's a good thing. I mean, they'll be an underdog for any matchup they have in the playoffs going forward, any matchup, NFC or AFC. So they're kind of in their comfort zone, the Texans are. So I'm interested to see how CJ Stroud and company continue to react to that.
Yeah, no, I think there's some good points there for sure. Real quick, we got a couple of questions, comments coming in here. Binkin over on YouTube saying, "Sup, fellas?" Not much, Binkin. You know how we do it. And then Binkin saying, "Do you expect more points and offense from Washington this week? Do you think they held back some last week versus Tampa?" Interesting question for sure. I don't know that you hold back in a playoff game.
Yeah, I don't know that they held back. I think Tampa Bay is an interesting team to have to game plan for because they don't give it up on the ground, period.
Right.
They just don't. And so Washington, while developing, they don't have star skill position players outside of Terry McLaurin, right? Zach Ertz is good. Brown, serviceable. They have pieces, but they don't have like big time players outside of what McLaurin did this season. So on top, it's a rookie quarterback. So you are trying to make sure he's comfortable within the game. I don't know if they held anything back. And points come to premium in the playoffs too, bud, right? I mean, we see teams many times, right? They lead the league in scoring. They're averaging 30 plus points a game, and they get in the playoffs and they're squeaking by, 24, 21. Like everybody's intensity ratchets up a little bit, and the smallest error becomes a ripple effect to the biggest problem within the game. And in the regular season, a lot of times you can survive that because there's another week. But in the playoffs, sometimes that little mistake, it just eats at people, right? You just don't know. None of us know, like, the true strength of their mind, if that makes sense, right? To be able to deal with knowing this tiny mistake could have this ripple effect. Point in case, the Baker fumble, right? It was one bad play. I mean, throughout the game, Baker played pretty damn well. It was one miscue at the worst possible time, and poof, fumble. Washington is able to kind of get off a little schneid that they were having with being able to put the ball in the end zone. Jalen Daniels finds McLaurin in the back of the end zone almost right away, and Washington had momentum in the fourth quarter because of that. When really Tampa Bay, it kind of felt like they were going to salt that game away, and that one play just completely flipped it on its head. Then you get the good fortune. I mean, maybe a little bit of luck, but the good fortune of, the doink in,
Right.
one more inch to the right, and that thing's straight back at you, and that game's going into overtime. So
Right.
we'll call it good fortune. It's the playoffs, but more points, I think, is kind of relative. I think 24 to 28 points is kind of the standard in these playoff games
Right.
of a winning recipe, and Washington was right in that realm, and maybe there's a wrinkle or two that they're holding back, but I don't think they're holding a bunch back.
Right. Well, and I think Tampa Bay played a really good, sound defensive game plan against Washington. Right. Jaden Daniels managed to put up some yards, but they really didn't put up anything on the ground against Tampa Bay. Jaden Daniels led the team in rushing with 36 yards, and it took 13 carries to get there. Right. Like that's a lot of carries for your quarterback to be, toting the rock. Also when you start looking at some of those things, just I think you're right. There's not one of those that you're holding anything back for next week because in the playoffs next week is not guaranteed. I think it'll be interesting to see what we see this week, right, with the Lions team that's on the defensive side certainly very banged up over the end of the regular season. They did get the bye week. We'll see what they look like coming back. But like the Viking or the Lions put up a really good game plan against what at the time was a rather hot Minnesota offense coming in there and just stifled them. And so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like and how that comes to play. I don't know that we're going to see them really, put up a ton more points than what we saw there, right? Like this Lions Commanders game, like, I don't know that we're going to see. I'm sure that that'll have a big point total, but again, I think this might be one of those that comes down to a 24-17 type of matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming Vegas has lines on the game. I haven't looked at them, so I'm going to tell you Vegas will put it at like 48.5 because they know people are going to want to hit both sides, right? Like Vegas is close, but Vegas also sets lines based off of where the money comes in at. And so I'm going to guess they set it about 48.5 with both of those offenses.
Yeah, they've got it at 55.5.
Stop it. 55.
55.5. And I don't think that game gets to.
Binkin, you might get your points, buddy, because they're seeing something I'm not for playoff football. I'm not seeing 55.5.
8.5 is where 9.5 is where the line is currently at.
Oof. Well,
Buffalo and Baltimore 51.5. That one I could potentially see, but both of those teams have been playing some pretty good defense down the stretch.
They have, and I'm interested to see that rematch because Baltimore absolutely shellacked them in the regular season. Absolutely waylaid the Bills. I remember I was where was I? I was in Fort Collins. We were at Bojo's Pizza, the family and I were. And I don't even remember why we were up in Fort Collins, but we were watching that. We went in there and the game was on TV, and I was blown away by. Now that was early in the season, so lots of things have changed. But Baltimore embarrassed them in the regular season, so I'm interested to see why they think that point total is going to be so high.
Right.
So there you go. So you might get points.
All right. And Big and saying, do you guys see Washington being able to extend drives and finish them scoring TDs with a 29-27 type of score?
Extending drives at times might be a little tough, but if they can, I think eventually what a lot of people are worried about is Dan Campbell's propensity to go for it on fourth down. Right? And so maybe you're not extending drives so much, but maybe you're stealing possessions in a sense. Because instead of giving up a field goal or you're pinned down super deep at a punt because it's in kind of no man's land there at midfield, if the Lions go for it and if the Commanders are able to stop them, you flip field position pretty quick that way. And so while it's not extending drives, you are almost stealing possessions because you're not pinned so far back and you're not giving up points in either one of those scenarios. So I'm twisting your question around a little bit, Binkin, and I understand that because I'm not sure that it's going to be extending drives, maybe one or two, but I don't think it's going to be consistently extending drives. I think where the biggest opportunity for any team who plays Detroit is, can you get fourth down stops? Because Campbell's going to go for it on fourth down. He has shown that. He does not want to kick the ball away. He wants 6, and he is willing to lay it on the table because he believes in his guys. And to this point, we haven't found a team that's able to consistently stop them and make Campbell pay for a decision like that. Right. Does that change in the playoffs? I mean, does Washington change it specifically, right? They're the next team up. Possibly. They've shown bits and pieces, right? It's not consistently a top 5 defense, but they've shown flashes. And anytime you have Bobby Wagner anchoring your defense as the signal caller, he has so much experience as kind of that defensive quarterback that I think you can absolutely get yourself in the right position and steal a possession to get a short field and get some easier points.
Yeah. Well, and I think it'll be interesting too to see what Detroit does as far as, right, like I think you're going to see, it'll be interesting to see how that front four kind of do, right? Like, do you see it where you see them just maintain their rushing lanes and you're going to, try and turn Jaden Daniels more one-dimensional at that point with the spy and everything else, and how that banged up secondary can hold up to that too. So, and there's certainly some of that could be, but the fact that that you just had a week off to get guys rested up, and Detroit had the early bye, like they had their bye was in week 5, so one of those that this playoff bye certainly would have come at a opportune time for them. I don't know that I necessarily agree with them. The line of 9.5. I think that this will stay a little bit closer. I think we'll be in that 7-point range, but I do believe as we start getting close to this game, we're going to probably see that line come down from the 55.5 because it does look like a large percentage of the bets out there are on the under. So Bing is saying I think Detroit is league worst giving up rushing yards to QBs. I'd have to look into that, but I think that you'll see a very different game plan come to play this week than what you've seen in maybe weeks past there. So, any other thoughts on this Washington and Detroit game?
No. I mean, I think Washington can give them the game. I do not see Washington with many paths to victory. Like, the Washington path to victory is capitalizing on short fields. So they got to be able to turn Jared Goff over, and he's done a really good job of taking care of the football. And they got to get off the field on fourth down. If they can turn Goff over once, maybe twice, and get, a crucial fourth down stop, or maybe, 2 throughout the game to kind of force Campbell's hand to kick the ball away some other times where he would like to go for it. I think that's where Washington's able to kind of set themselves up for an upset. But if Goff has a clean game, and just by clean I mean 0 turnovers, it's going to take 6 or 7 sacks to offset 0 turnovers, I think, for Washington to be able to pull off this upset.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. So yeah, an interesting one there for sure. One of the things that kept coming up, and I kept seeing in the broadcast there, was some of the talk about the quarterbacks. And interestingly enough, right, like when watching the Denver and Buffalo game, I don't know how many different times throughout the broadcast I heard them bring up that Denver and drafting the Josh Allen side of things and this, that, and the other, and all of those things. And every time I heard them mention that and bring that up, I was like, well, how does that necessarily change what all of the other first round quarterback draft picks that the Broncos had spent on quarterbacks after after Peyton? I don't know that it does, right? Like some of that we've seen so much of these quarterbacks requiring the time to develop and time to grow into that and become that guy that I don't know Denver was equipped to do that from a coaching standpoint and building talent perspective back when they would have been required to draft him.
Yeah, I don't know that they were proficient enough across the offensive line. And I
Nope.
don't know that they could have gotten there fast enough to have Josh Allen be what Josh Allen is today, right? As arguably the MVP, a guy who carries this on his back. I think Buffalo at that time was better equipped to take in a rookie quarterback and start him, and bringing in Diggs pretty much right away and giving him kind of a guy to throw to. But the Broncos offensive line was in shambles. And yes, the defense has been good. And so maybe it helps that a little bit. But I mean, you talk about the Trevor Simeons and Paxton Lynch's and
Brock
um,
Osweiler's and
the Brock Osweiler year, and obviously, most recently Russell Wilson. Like, um, there's no doubt that Allen could have been better, but does the Broncos organization slow down his development inadvertently because they weren't prepared for a superstar quarterback?
right. Well, and I mean that's the thing, right? And I think that's some of the thing too that gets potentially lost there in the memory of things, right? There was a lot of folks going into year 3 of Josh Allen really questioning whether or not he was a bust. Like in Buffalo, like, there was a lot of that it was he had to make the turn, he had to make the leap, he had to do all of these things, and it wasn't until they brought in Stephon Diggs that you saw him take that leap forward um, at the position. But I remember that a lot of conversations leading into that third year that the completion percentage wasn't there, that all of these things, that it was really going to take the turning the corner here in quick, fast, and in a hurry for him to really be that guy. And he did it in the third season. But I don't know that back in 2018, 2019, going into 2020, if the Broncos, in all of their turmoil that went through on the roster, on the coaching staff, on the ownership side of all of that stuff going on, I don't know that there was the support system there to have him develop into what he's become. And that's the
No,
thing that I
Nathaniel Hackett does not help Josh Allen.
no, and I think Nathaniel Hackett would have been what he would have been after that, but still at that point you were talking with the Vic Fangio and Vance Joseph type of things. I think is when the time frames we probably would have been looking at there. So certainly a lot of that just doesn't compute and doesn't make sense. So that
Yeah,
was
it's all good. They are where they are, right? Drew
right.
Lock played better this year than what I thought he was going to play. I think
Mhm.
the Broncos making it to the playoffs it was obtainable preseason, but it was a big leap. Um,
Mhm.
and they did it, and ultimately, I think because they did it, they're probably a year ahead of schedule.
Right.
right? Like, I don't think that anybody expected them to make a ton of noise. Now, did you want the defense to play a little bit better in the playoffs? Yeah, you wanted Vance Joseph to put together a better performance than giving up 31 in the wild card round.
Right.
But this was a team that led the NFL in sacks, going up against a team that allowed, like, I mean, Josh Allen was sacked like third least or something like that in the NFL this season. Like, his scrambling ability and the offensive line ability that Buffalo has, like, just didn't give up a bunch of sacks. And that shows his maturity because a couple years ago, he was still taking a ton of sacks. And this year, he really made a good effort of getting the ball out quick. And that's the best way to beat a team with a good pass rush and a team that gets a lot of sack numbers is you take the Tom Brady approach, right? 2.5
Right.
seconds. Bam, bam, bam. And, it is death by 1,000 paper cuts. And then, you break the big one and it breaks your back.
Right.
And that's almost exactly what Buffalo did.
And it certainly didn't help either that the Broncos offense had a hard time, putting together drives and sustaining drives, right? Like there was a ton of those that it was up 3 and out, up 3 and out. Oh, they managed to string together 5 plays, up punt. Like it was not a very, it was one of those that it's really tough for them to be able to have a defense that is, really ready to go in the second half when the time of possession was as lopsided as it is, right? There's only so many times that you can ask them to hold back, to hold up the dam, when they're not getting any support on the other side of that either. So
Yeah. The Broncos look like a team with a lack of playoff experience, and that's exactly what they are.
Yep. So the other thing too that in that Monday night game, all of the talk into that was the Sam Darnold side of things and the where's he going to go and all this and all that, and because JJ McCarthy's there waiting. I'm like, I don't know that it's one of those that you need to necessarily turn the reins over right away, right? Like this is. You can still franchise tag if you can't get a deal done, right? If Darnold doesn't want to put together a 2-year stay there and hand the reins over type of thing. I liked your thoughts from was it last week or the week before where it was potentially trading JJ and you signed Darnold to a long-term deal. But like there's some of that they're going on and on and on about that I'm like, I don't know that it makes sense if you're a 14-win team to necessarily turn away from the quarterback that got you there to hand it over to an unproven rookie.
No, I agree. If you're 9-8 and you squeak in, I can see, what's the worst that can happen, right? Like we got into the playoffs, but maybe we don't feel like we were a true contender. You guys were a game away from being the number 1 seed.
Right.
You went from 1 to 5 and went up against your kryptonite. Like that's what happened. You went from 1 to 5 because you went up against your kryptonite, and it's just not a good matchup for you guys, right? And for whatever reason, defensively, the Rams can keep the Vikings in check. And again, the Rams are a pretty veteran team, right? Like they have playoff experience up and down that roster. You have right, wrong, or indifferent, Matt Stafford getting into the right play at the right time. And Darnold is still learning some of that. He was never in those types of situations when he was with the Jets. And yes, he got to see from the sidelines in San Francisco how some of that is done. But seeing from the sidelines and applying it in a playoff game are 2 different situations. But yeah, I know Minnesota fans are frustrated and they're just kind of saying, well, screw this. Like, let's just go to JJ. Like, JJ's not going to win you 14 games. Like, I don't think JJ wins you 9 games next year.
Right.
Like, it's just don't think that because you see Jaden Daniels and Drew Lock both get into the playoffs, or Bo Nix, excuse me, as rookies, that you're going to have the same success because Caleb Williams is sitting his butt at home, and he was the number 1 overall pick.
Right.
So I don't see that as the solution for Minnesota. And I know they drafted this kid, but that's what I'm saying. Flip him. Like, you have a window now, so flip him. Get some draft picks, bring a guy in a position of need that you can absolutely start him right now.
Right.
And go from there, whether it's offensive line help, whether you get the best pass rusher available and pair him up there in Minnesota and give Brian Flores, there we go, Flores another toy on the defensive side of the ball, like whatever that looks like. But I think that's the path that Minnesota should take if they find a good trade partner for J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah. I like it. Binkin saying that Lamar's offensive line has looked better and better as the season progressed. Do you guys think Lamar has the best line he's ever had right now?
Ooh.
There certainly could be something to that. I think there's also some of that with the before, right, you had, like, the Ravens have had a pretty solid offensive line over his career, but I think you added Derrick Henry into the mix too, and now you really have to respect that RPO at a level that you maybe hadn't had to before, right? And I think you saw some of that play out on Derrick Henry's long touchdown run here in the Wildcard Weekend, where there's an RPO, the defense sucked over to Lamar, and Derrick Henry just took it up the middle for 40 plus. Like, I think there is some of that there as well. That the line playing really well also is benefited by the run game that's there, and you having to respect the options of whether it's Derrick Henry or it's Lamar Jackson getting out, and the fact that you have to respect that has helped the offensive line, and by the same token, the offensive line playing as well as they have, allows for those lanes to open up for those guys to just break a long one. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
I think I'd agree with that. Looking back, if I had to tell you the best offensive line that Lamar's had, just top to bottom talent-wise, I think it was the year after his first MVP, and they really cemented themselves. The problem was Dobbins got hurt. Gus Edwards got hurt, then they didn't have any other running game threat, and Lamar was still developing as a passer. Right? He did things, but he wasn't nearly as efficient as he's been the last couple of years under Todd Monken. But I think that might have been the best offensive line. I do think that this one cohesively works better, but I think, to Derek's point, you have a running back that demands the utmost respect from defenses. And in years past, I think you could cheat on that a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Like, not that J.K. Dobbins isn't good when he's healthy. He is. And not that Gus Edwards isn't serviceable. He is. But Derrick Henry is in a league of his own, right? It's him and Saquon. And they showed it this year, right? And having that running back who can get 3 or 4 yards out of absolutely nothing helps make an offensive line maybe look a little bit better. It helps cover up some of the blemishes because they all have them, right? All these offensive lines have them. So the fact that Henry can plow ahead and save a play, the fact that Lamar is probably seeing the game of football the best that he's ever seen it, right? As far as visually understanding the concept that the defense is trying to apply against his offensive unit. It's at a level that I never thought we would see with Lamar Jackson.
Right.
And kudos to him for staying in the playbook and learning and being a student of the game. Kudos to Todd Monken, who came in and kind of revamped this offense a little bit and helped take it that next step above, that it wasn't just it's an RPO, but it's a quarterback driven RPO. Well, now I'd argue it's the other way, right? We've seen Lamar ran fewer times this year than at any point in his career, but the playoffs come around and now he's able to have his legs, right? Now he has his legs still because he hasn't absorbed some of those hits. So when you're starting out in the game against Pittsburgh, right, the first 4 or 5 runs, it wasn't Derrick Henry, it was Lamar. And it got everyone focused on him, and that's what sets it up, because you still, you respect the run game so much to start that Lamar could kind of get going, and then you get focused in on Lamar, and you have a back like Henry who can, go over you, go around you, go through you, whatever he needs to do, and set it up. So I think it looks the best that it's ever looked because all the pieces around are truly the right pieces.
Right. So I think there's a lot to that. And also, right, like you mentioned, Saquon and Derrick Henry kind of in that same breath, same level. I think that Saquon and his trip to Philly and what you've seen through that, I think that similar thing that just kind of puts the exclamation point on the point being made is that the running back benefits from having a great offensive line in front of them, because both of these guys, there was a lot of talk of, they're past their prime, they may have lost a step, like these aren't the same guys from a few years previous. And Derrick Henry just became I believe he's the first player in NFL history to rush for more than 1,900 yards in a season and not win the NFL rushing title. Like that's crazy to think about. So there is certainly some of that. And then Binkin saying more so with the pocket when he's passing with that line, the pass protection, and saying that really he's talking about the line's ability to pass protect more so than the running side of things. And I think that there's something to that, right? And I think that the line also plays off of the fact that running game is what it is, right? You think back to Tennessee not that many years ago with Derrick Henry in the backfield there. Ryan Tannehill looked really, really good running off of the play action pass and setting up the run type of thing. And the fact that teams had to respect the run, it helped open up the passing game. And I think you've seen a lot of that also play out in Baltimore here as well, with the simple fact that you've got to put more guys in the box. You've got to have more folks in there to be able to slow down and stop the run, that it opens up the passing lanes as well. And with the fact that, when it becomes a passing deal, you've now got those linebackers and those guys in that second level having to try and fall back into coverage instead of coming at the quarterback, that it further helps out the line there as well. So I think that that it's really a package deal there. I think that all the pieces, to your point, I think that all the pieces are there, and that all of the pieces on the offensive line very much complement one another. And it very well could be that this may be the best line that they've played behind, but and if it's not, I think this may be the most cohesive unit that we've seen him played behind.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Sorry, I'm trying to look up Lamar's ADOT, because I think part of what that goes back to him seeing the game so well, is he's not constantly trying to drive the ball down the field to a Hollywood or a Mark Andrews who's going deep over the middle, that he's able to air yards per attempt.
8.8. Yards per attempt was an 8.8 for that. I can see if I can actually find actual average depth of target there.
5,
okay.
I believe. So still, I mean, it's impressive. That's third in the league, it looks like, behind Sam Darnold and Brock Purdy.
Right. And Michael Penix was there, but not enough starts or pass attempts for that to really be a...
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, he does. He has a little bit more time, and Wish this thing were updating and it's not, so I apologize.
So, but no, I mean, it's certainly a really good question and a good point there, Bingen. So, all righty. Any other thoughts on this one?
Here we go. In 22, sorry, I finally got it to work. In 22, it was 4.3. Let's see how fast this updates. In 23, it was 4.7. So he's connecting on his mid routes at a much higher clip, and it's driving this up. 21 is 4.7. So yeah, I mean the highest air yards per attempt. So yeah, he's able to connect on these, and the routes are open. So yeah, I mean pass protection wise, Binkin, yes, he probably does. He has a little bit more time. Teams are respecting the run, and because of that, he's able to sit back a little bit and let the play develop, because they're focused in on Henry maybe a little bit more, and his overall skill set at receiver is probably better. He has Andrews. We've seen Bateman make flashes, right? Not the player that we thought Bateman could have been coming out of college, but Bateman's had flashes. And Zay Flowers has been a really good receiver. Like quietly has been a very good receiver for excuse me, the Ravens for the last couple of years here. So I mean, it absolutely more talent around him, respecting the run game because you just have an all-pro type running back standing beside you, maturity from the quarterback, maybe better route compositions from the offensive coordinator, all the things combined. So yes, you could absolutely argue your point that yeah, it probably holistically, maybe it is the best offensive line he's had. Not just looking at the talent pool, but holistically, and as the unit moves, you could absolutely argue it's the best offensive line he's had.
Yeah. Which is kind of crazy to think about, right? Because there was at one point you had Ronnie Staley as the left tackle, and you had Orlando Brown as the right tackle on that.
Mhm.
Like from a talent level, like those, you really don't get better tackles than that,
Right.
on a line there. So, but no, I think this unit and the way they operate together may be the best that we've seen out of them. So very cool. Alrighty. And then some other kind of things out there. Any thoughts around any of like the coaching carousel, any of the vacancies?
So Vrabel signed,
Right.
worst kept secret ever. We talked about that last Tuesday, and we
Right.
said that Vrabel was going to be the head coach. And not that we were the first to that, but it sure made the most sense. And sure enough, a few days after that, Vrabel's the next coach. So,
Right.
okay, fine. I think the interesting thing right now is the reports that the Cowboys are talking to Dion.
Right.
I mean, that it's the most Jerry Jones thing you could possibly think of, right? They let the clock expire on Mike McCarthy. They weren't going to negotiate, and so now Jerry's like, well, what about Dion? It's like, well, what about getting a coach in there that can manage the, I guess, egos, talent level, manage the expectations of the Cowboys organization in general, right? I mean, I was listening to a show at some point within the last week, I think, and they made a comparison that at first you just say it out loud and you're going, no, that's BS. And then you break it down by the numbers and you go, holy crap, this is true. And he was comparing the Dallas Cowboys to the Cleveland Browns.
I can see it.
Like the two of them are almost identical. I think the Cowboys have one more playoff appearance, but no more playoff wins. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, ouch. I was like, that hurts for a lot of Cowboys fans here in Texas. It's like, oh golly. But and Jones is the biggest problem. He's the biggest problem. People in Dallas hate Dak Prescott. It's amazing how much they revere Tony Romo and hate Dak Prescott. And I'm looking at it going, they're basically the same guy. But whatever works. I mean,
Right.
he got paid. He was the next guy up. Like, there's nothing else you could have done because you don't sign Tony Romo. You draft J.J. McCarthy. And then you don't have a quarterback this year anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
nothing with this season changes. You miss the playoffs. You're flirting for third or fourth in the division. Like, nothing changes,
right.
and nothing nothing gets accomplished. You just maybe have more salary cap room. Like, so, I mean, maybe. I don't know. I don't
Well,
see it. They got a lot to work on. The Cowboys have some struggles, big time. I don't think Rico Dowdles is the answer at running back. I think he's a piece, but I don't think he's the guy. Like, I
right.
think they need a better, more consistent number 2 option behind CeeDee Lamb. Brandon Cooks is a good piece now, but he's not the guy anymore. Like, he's a really good number 3. They need a number 2 to stand up next to CeeDee Lamb and help him out. They need their offensive line to stay healthy. They need some help in the secondary and not so many gamblers. Like, they just need people who are enforcers in the secondary and not gamble, but can just have sound coverage. Like, almost like Stephon Gilmore type, right? And Gilmore's probably going to be a Hall of Famer. Like, it's not a light comparison. I realize that, but I mean, there's a bunch of holes in Dallas that they need to fill, and
Right.
they're going to struggle to do it.
Well, and right, like, because that's been a lot of the talk around Denver is the and especially on the sports radio around here is the Cowboys and Coach Prime and this, that, and the other and all of these things, and it really does come down to the fact of, right, like, personality wise, right, like there is some of that as the college coach, right, like, you are the face of the program, you are the driving personality behind that, right, like that's the coach, how the coach goes typically is how the program goes, right. With Cowboys, it the you don't, as a coach, you don't necessarily get to have the strongest personality in the building, right? And for the NFL teams in general, right, the strongest personalities typically may not necessarily do overly well, right? Like, got to manage the entire locker room there. And at that point, I don't know how Jerry and Dion managed to manage to make that one work, right? Like, one of the last real times that we saw a coach that had a very big personality in Dallas, and a really had his hands on the GM side of things, and really making roster decisions and making moves and all of that was Jimmy Johnson. And maybe there is some of that Jerry's trying to recapture some of that to it, but this is one of those that I just don't know how that necessarily fits to that one. So I don't know on that one, right? Some of these other coaching changes out there, it'll be interesting to see how some of these things kind of look and work. You're starting to see a lot of teams, really kind of announce their interviews, and a lot of teams going through their interview cycles and really kind of going through that. But it'll be interesting to see how some of these things look and work. And a lot of teams have both Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn as on kind of their short list there. It'll be interesting to see if they, what they choose to do, if they're going to leave Detroit and move on, or if they're going to, continue to kind of stay and really wait for the right opportunity there. So be very interesting to see how that one all looks and works.
Yeah. One of the other ones I think I saw come across, the Bears wanting to talk to Williams, the Notre Dame's head coach. Did you see that one?
I had not
Or
seen that
Browns?
one yet. Yeah, I had not seen that one.
So that one's gonna be interesting. I mean, he's a young guy. I like his attitude though. He strikes me as a really good college coach. I really hadn't thought about him in professional circles, but I think the Bears are just trying to interview everybody right now. Like, I think they finally get it that they can't just go with the easy name or the hot name. Like, I think they truly understand that they need to get this one right for Caleb Williams. So the Bears have a massive interview list, just trying to talk to everybody. So we'll see. I mean, there's something about football that's probably a bit better when the Bears are better than what they are, right? At least competitive, right? They the monsters of the Midway, and they have that that grit that the Midwest types, Chicago, right, kind of carries, and it's probably better for football that way, holistically. So we'll see how that goes. But I mean, I haven't heard a peep out of Jacksonville. Have you?
No, and that was I know that they've done some head coaches, right? Like they or head coaching interviews, right? Like I know that that they've completed with Spagnola, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Patrick Graham. Like I know that they've announced that they've completed those interviews there, and that they've got several more kind of lined up, right? Like, but I haven't heard of anything as far as leanings one way or another, or guys kind of favored to be that guy there. So I don't know that it'll like that. That's an interesting one as well, right? Because they've got pieces, but they've also got a lot of pieces needed to make a run there as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think the Raiders are after Glenn pretty hard from at least the reports, right? The Schefter reports, and the things that you hear on Twitter, and everybody pontificating on what's going to happen. But it seems like the Raiders are after Glenn, which is interesting because Antonio Pierce and Glenn, I feel like, are a lot of the same guy.
yeah,
Like, and you just got rid of Antonio Pierce. Like, why are you going after the same type of guy that you just let go of and expecting a different result?
right.
But
I
that's
think
very Raiders.
yeah, I think what you'll see them do is ultimately go out, draft a quarterback, and they'll have an offensive mind head coach, tied to that one. So I think that's probably where you may see, and it'll be interesting to see too, right? Like that the reports of Brady coming in and being part of that ownership group. Like, how does that influence that? And so it'll be interesting to see how that thing ultimately kind of plays out there.
He's going to be an owner coach. Could you
Right?
imagine Brady as a coach, getting him animated on the sideline again?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Like it's so that's the weirdest part about hearing him on the Fox telecast, is because you hear Tom Brady and it's Tom Brady. But then you go back of all the clips on Tom Brady on the sideline, just dog cussing people, the coaches, the referees, the players. Like,
Right.
Brady has a mouth,
Yes.
and that's coming from a guy who feels like he can compete with anybody when it comes to that realm. And even you look at Brady, go, oh man, like, good for you, dude.
Yeah.
But when you're as decorated as Tom Brady is, you can get away with a lot of that. Just
Right.
by being you. You walk in the room and people kind of let you do what you want to do.
It's true. That is very true. Yeah. Any other thoughts on any of the coaching carousel?
Not I don't know about any others. It's very infant stage, right? The bye week's the first stage, and then it kind of cools off a little bit. And then you hear of some more things go on between the conference championship weekend and the Super Bowl. You'll hear some more things kind of go on there during that Pro Bowl week. Um, and some pieces will continue to fall into place. But I mean, nothing that sticks out. I mean, this Dion thing that we spent plenty of time on the Dion thing, but that seems to be the biggest, like, ooh, look at that type thing. And then everything else, it's the Lions coordinators, right? It's the Lions coordinators, both, and now Dion are kind of the three names that make you go, huh, I wonder where they're going to land. I need to keep an eye on that. And outside of that,
Right.
not that there aren't guys deserving, but it just doesn't seem like it's much of a buzz cycle as we've seen in the past.
Well, I think a lot of teams are waiting to see what happens with both Lions coordinators before they're going to ultimately make a decision on who their guy is, right? Like I think a lot of teams have those guys as their number one, number two candidates that they'd like to hire in for that position. And if they don't get either one, right, then it falls into where do they go from there, right? I think that there's a lot to that, and it very well could come down to, right? I remember a few years ago, right, with I forget their names, Arizona's head coach and Indianapolis's head coach these days. But both of them, when they were coordinators for Philadelphia, right, like during that coaching cycle, a lot of that was waiting to see where those guys landed, and then from there, then the rest of the teams were kind of falling in line with what they were, who they were hiring.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I wonder, a name that just popped in my head. I wonder if teams are going to take another run at Flores, the Vikings defensive coordinator. He got a bad rap in his first round, right? Like the Miami experience.
Right.
He got a bad rap, and he's taken a couple years off. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him poke back around for an interview or two. And I think rightfully deserved. Like, I think players really like Brian Flores. I think for whatever reason, Miami didn't necessarily work out, but you saw it with Minnesota. Like, he was able to take a defense that a lot of people did not think were going to be very good this season and make them extremely difficult through most of the season with the different schemes that he ran and the concepts that he wanted to put out there. Like, it's a thick defensive playbook, but when a team can grasp hold of that, and they're willing to buy in, he's shown that he can take good talent and make it really good. So that might be an interesting thing now that the Vikings are out, to see if his name gets popped around a little bit.
Yeah, I've seen him, kind of rumored out there at a few different spots. It'll be interesting to see, right? Like I know that there were some reports that surfaced after he's left about his relationship with Tua and how some of the player interactions went and all of that, to see if maybe that's still a potential concern, or if if kind of taking that step back and re-engaging as a defensive coordinator, if that's if there's been some growth and what that looks like there. So it could be very interesting to see how that one ultimately plays out. So alrighty. And then you know what, I've got a little guess the player lined up for us tonight. I think we'll go ahead and run through that and call it a night, if unless you have something else you want to hit up.
No, let's go ahead and guess that player.
I did see this comment come in here as well. Brandon saying, if the Lions win, do they have a pride parade? Well, they are known as One Pride. So anyway, guess the player. Okay.
It made me think of a joke I heard earlier that I can't share at all.
Okay. So, guess the player. This player is a running back, so I'll narrow it down right off the bat with that one. So it's a running back. This player had over 1,000 yards rushing. And let me know if you've got a guess, and I'll let you know yes or no.
James Conner. No.
I like the guess though. One of these other clues later on will rule out James Conner as well. This running back had more rushing TDs than both Saquon and Monty this year.
Jahmyr Gibbs.
I like the guess. Not correct, though. This running back averaged more yards per carry than both Chuba Hubbard and Devon Achane.
Derrick Henry.
I like the guess, and still not correct.
Hmm.
This running back had more receptions on their team than all but one of the wide receivers on their team.
Joe Mixon.
I like the guess, still not correct.
Dang. All right.
This running back had more fantasy points per game and half-point PPR scoring than both James Conner and Chase Brown.
James Cook.
That is correct. That is correct. So James Cook was the answer, right? He had a top 10 points per
The
game.
touchdown thing finally caught up with me. I was thinking
Yeah.
through. I was like, wait, I've seen it. Who are James Cook? Yep.
Yep. You know how hard it was to try and find names that had really high rushing touchdowns. They were like, oh, there's not many guys that could do that. But yeah, James Cook had that sneaky, really had a
He had a
sneaky
really good year.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a really good year. He did.
So
it was nice to see that. It was definitely part of Buffalo's success for sure. Like they embraced the running game. James Cook stayed healthy. He limited the fumbles, which kind of bugged him there last year just a little bit, and was able to break off a couple longer ones. But he got the ball in the red zone a little bit more this year than what he got last year. That definitely helped. But hell yeah, he had a really good year. Like he was a guy that I was on the fence about, honestly, preseason, right? I wasn't quite sure how Buffalo was going to use him and where I had to draft him. And in one or two places, I bit off and I went for it, and I'm glad I did. And then there's some others I went, shoot, like I probably should have done that in hindsight. And, it's easier, but hell yeah. Georgia boy right there. I like it.
Yep. So, and then Binkett had a couple of guesses saying it was LT. And that's on me for not setting up that one. It was a current running back, and he then came back with the guess of Mixon, which was right about the time you were saying that one as well. So I like it. Smokey the Cat saying that Baltimore, the Rams, the Chiefs, and the Lions all advance this week. Not bad picks. I could see that.
That Rams Philly game, I think, will be pretty stinking good.
Yes. Yeah.
Baltimore, I can see that. I can see that for sure.
Right.
KC, I expect Houston to give Kansas City more of a game than a lot of people expect, but I can see Kansas City pulling that out. The referees will not allow Kansas City to get knocked out in the divisional round.
I like it. Binkett saying, okay, fellas, that he is out. Good luck this week in DFS, and props. See y'all next time. Appreciate that, Binkin.
See you, buddy.
All righty. Well, Kevin, I think that's going to take us down here to the end of it. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
And just enjoy the divisional round, right? We got a couple weeks to reset. It's not so much fantasy football driven here for the next few weeks, as you guys can tell by last week's show and this week's show. But that's all right. We got yes, there's some DFS. We got some fun prop bets, that are always there for the Super Bowl that we'll talk about leading up to it here in a few weeks. But now you sit back and relax. A week off from college football as we get ready for the finals, a week from Monday. So it's all about the NFL this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for us. I do appreciate everybody tuning in, chiming in, all the chat and the interaction. Always a lot of fun to get to chat with everybody there. But that's going to do it for us tonight. He's Kevin. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloos.